I have survived 3 decades of hard work, buried a wife I loved more than breathing, and raised a daughter I would have died for. The keyword being would have. Because the night I forgot my hearing aid and turned back toward that house, nothing in my 68 years of living could have prepared me for what I was about to hear. Welcome back to your ultimate destination for gripping revenge stories, family betrayals, shocking betrayals, and emotional justice. Subscribe now and join a community and tell us where you're watching from. Turn on the notification bell for our next story. Are you ready to witness the ultimate payback? Let's get started. I am Mr. ZAHA, and I am 68 years old. I want you to understand something before this story goes any further. I am not a weak man. I am not the kind of man who crumbles at the first sign of trouble, who leans against walls and weeps, who calls his friends to complain about his aching knees or his fading vision. I was born in a small house in rural Tennessee to a man who worked the land with cracked hands and a woman who stretched a dollar so thin you could see daylight through it. I learned early that life did not negotiate. Life did not send you a warning letter. Life simply arrived, heavy, unannounced, and you either carried it or it buried you. For 68 years, I carried it. I carried it through 22 years working as a structural engineer for a firm in Charlotte, North Carolina, designing bridges and overpasses that still stand today. I carried it through the slow, grinding grief of losing my wife, Margaret, to pancreatic cancer 11 years ago. I carried it through the particular loneliness that no one warns you about, the kind that sets in after the funeral flowers wilt and the casserole dishes stop appearing at your door and the world just resumes. Without her, without the warmth she poured into every room she entered. And I carried it, or at least I believed I was carrying it, through the chapter that began after Margaret died, the chapter where my daughter, Maureen, and her husband, Julius, invited me to come live with them. Let me tell you about Maureen first. Maureen was the best thing Margaret and I ever did. I mean that with every atom in my body. She came into the world on a Tuesday morning in October, screaming at the top of her lungs as though she already had opinions about things and wanted everyone to know it. She had her mother's eyes, that deep, warm brown that caught light in a way that made you feel seen, genuinely seen, even when you were just passing the butter at the dinner table. She was sharp. Lord, was she sharp. She finished at the top of her class at UNC Charlotte, got her master's in education, became a high school principal by the time she was 38. Margaret used to say Maureen got her brains from me and her heart from her. I never argued with that. After Margaret died, Maureen called me every single day for a year. Every day? Sometimes just to ask what I'd eaten for lunch. Sometimes to tell me something funny that had happened at school. Sometimes just to sit on the phone in comfortable silence while I pretended to watch television and she pretended she wasn't worried about me. When she finally brought up the idea of me moving in with her and Julius, she framed it so carefully, so gently, the way you hold something fragile up to the light. Daddy, she said, this house has 4 bedrooms and 2 of them are just sitting there. I don't want to picture you alone in that big house another winter. I resisted for 6 months. I was a proud man. I am a proud man. The idea of being looked after, of trading my independence for proximity, sat in my chest like a stone. But that winter was a bad one. Not just the weather, but the silence inside my walls. The particular silence of a house that used to hold love and now just held furniture. So I sold the Charlotte house, packed what mattered, and moved into Maureen and Julius's home in Raleigh. That was 3 years ago. Now let me tell you about Julius. Julius Crane was 44 years old, 6'2", broad-shouldered, with the kind of easy charm that made men want to shake his hand and made women want to trust him immediately. He was a commercial real estate developer. Successful, genuinely successful, not the borrowed lifestyle kind. He wore it quietly, which I respected. He drove a sensible car, kept the house maintained, never flashed money around in ways that made you uncomfortable. When Maureen first brought him home, 15 years ago now, he shook my hand firmly, looked me in the eye, and said, Mr. ZAHA, I love your daughter, and I understand that means proving myself to you every day. I'm ready to do that. I respected the man for saying it. I respected him even more when, for years, he appeared to mean it. But here is the thing about people. They are never entirely the thing you believe them to be. There is always a room inside a person that they keep locked. A room you don't know about until the door swings open at the wrong moment. My life in their house was, on the surface, comfortable. My room was on the ground floor, a concession to my knees, which had begun registering protests about staircases. I had my own bathroom, my own sitting area, a window that looked out over the backyard where Maureen had planted hydrangeas that Margaret would have loved. I had my routines. Morning coffee at 6:30. The newspaper, the actual paper, not a screen. I refused. A walk around the block at 8 if the weather cooperated. Lunch at noon. An afternoon program I liked, a history channel I'd gotten fond of. And I had my hearing aid. I need to explain about the hearing aid because it matters enormously to this story. I'd lost meaningful hearing in my left ear about 4 years ago. Age-related nerve damage, my audiologist explained, the kind that arrives quietly and stays. My right ear still functioned adequately, but in rooms with ambient noise, in conversations with multiple voices, in moments where context and nuance mattered, I missed things. The hearing aid had been a point of vanity for me for 2 years before I finally accepted it. A small, flesh-colored device that sat in my right ear and translated the world back to me in something closer to full volume. Without it, I lived in a slightly muted world. Manageable, but muted. That evening, the evening everything changed, I had been out to my friend Howard's house. Howard Briggs, 71, a retired contractor I'd known for 12 years, who lived about 8 minutes away and who had beaten prostate cancer the year prior and wanted to celebrate with bourbon and old stories. I'd driven myself, which I still did and intended to keep doing as long as my reflexes cooperated. I'd worn my good cardigan. I'd had 2 glasses of bourbon and 3 hours of the best kind of conversation, the kind between 2 old men who have nothing left to prove to each other. I left Howard's house at 8:47 in the evening. I know the time because I checked my watch at his door, the way I always do, because old habits from a life of structured engineering don't simply evaporate. I was 2 minutes down the road, headlights cutting through the cool October dark, when my hand went to my ear automatically, the checking gesture I developed without realizing it, the same way you tap your pocket for your wallet. My finger found only the smooth curve of my own ear. The hearing aid was sitting in the ceramic dish on Howard's bathroom counter. I'd taken it out when I washed my hands before dinner and forgotten to replace it in the distraction of conversation. I turned the car around. I want you to sit with that moment for a second, the simple, mundane ordinariness of it. A 68-year-old man turning his car around on a dark road to retrieve a small medical device. Nothing cinematic about it. Nothing foreboding. Just a man being practical. But sometimes the most ordinary moments are the doorways to the moments that rewrite everything. I made it back to Howard's, retrieved the hearing aid from the bathroom counter. Howard had already gone to bed, so I let myself out quietly with the spare key he'd given me years ago and drove home. It was 9:23 when I pulled into the driveway of the house on Whitmore Lane. The porch light was on. The downstairs was dark. I assumed Maureen and Julius had gone to bed early. They both kept demanding schedules, both up by 5:30 most mornings. I let myself in quietly through the front door, the way I'd practiced being quiet in that house. The consideration of a man who understood he was living in someone else's space even if they'd told him 100 times it was his home too. I was crossing the entryway toward my room when I heard it. Voices. From upstairs. From the direction of Maureen and Julius's bedroom. I paused. Not deliberately eavesdropping. Just the instinct of hearing human sound in a house you believe to be asleep. My right ear, aided now, caught the sound through the partial opening at the top of the stairs. Not words yet. Just the cadence of an argument. Tight, pressured, the compressed sound of people who were fighting quietly because they didn't want to be heard. And then, cutting through it, clear as a struck bell, Maureen's voice. Tonight, Julius. Tonight we end this. I stood in that entryway, one hand on the wall, my heart doing something I had no medical term for. Not stopping. Not racing. Something stranger, a kind of held stillness, like the moment before a bridge stress test when you don't yet know which way the numbers will fall. Tonight we end this. I am Mr. ZAHA. I am 68 years old. And in that moment, standing in the dark entryway of my daughter's house, I understood with a cold, absolute certainty that those 4 words were about me. If you're already feeling something in your chest right now, drop a comment below. Tell me, what do you think Maureen meant? What would you have done if you were Mr. ZAHA? I did not move for a long time. That is not hyperbole or the dramatic license of a man trying to make his story sound more significant than it was. I literally did not move. My hand stayed on that wall. My feet stayed rooted on the hardwood floor of the entryway. The house breathed around me. The low hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, the distant whisper of a television somewhere, the creak of the old house settling into the cold. And I stood in the middle of all of it like a man who had just been told something in a language he thought he knew but suddenly wasn't sure of. Tonight we end this. I replayed the words. The way you replay something not because you didn't hear it, but because some part of you is hoping, desperately, foolishly, that repetition will soften the meaning. That you'll find a different interpretation on the fourth or fifth pass. That the words will rearrange themselves into something less sharp. They didn't. Here is what I need you to understand about the particular terror of that moment. It was not the grand, explosive terror of a gunshot or a car crash. It was the quiet, interior terror of a man who suddenly is not sure whether the ground he has been standing on is ground at all. For 3 years, I had lived in this house trusting that I was wanted here. Trusting that Maureen's invitation had been genuine, that Julius's welcome had been real, that the home they'd made room for me in was a choice they'd made together and meant. For 3 years, every dinner at that table, every morning with my coffee by that window, every evening watching my history programs while they moved through the house around me, I had believed all of it was solid, real. Tonight we end this. And now I stood in the dark wondering if I had been, for 3 years, a burden that had finally grown too heavy to carry quietly. I want to be honest with you about something that I am not proud of. My first instinct was not anger. It was not the righteous fury of a wronged man. My first instinct, and I've turned this over in my mind 100 times since, was shame. A deep, grinding shame. The shame of a man who had maybe overstayed his welcome without knowing it. Who had been so desperate for family, for the warmth of a home after 11 years of accumulating loneliness, that he had perhaps imposed himself without realizing it. Made himself a fixture where he was a burden. That shame is what finally moved my feet. I could have gone to my room. I should have gone to my room. Any sensible person with a functioning sense of self-preservation would have gone directly to their room, shut the door softly, and figured things out in the morning. But I am 68 years old and I have learned, sometimes to my cost, that I am not always a sensible person. I am, more fundamentally, a man who believes that truth, even terrible truth, is preferable to comfortable uncertainty. So I moved toward the stairs. Not all the way up. I want to be clear about that. I did not go up those stairs with the intention of confronting anyone. I stood at the bottom, in the shadow of the landing, where the voices from the partially open bedroom door came down to me now with more clarity. My hearing aid, small and efficient in my ear, doing what it was designed to do, filling in the world I'd been missing. Julius's voice first, low and controlled, the way he always was when he was trying to win an argument through composure rather than volume. You're not thinking about the implications, Maureen. You're being emotional. Of course I'm emotional. Maureen's voice, and this is the part that broke something in me. Her voice was not cold. It was not the voice of a villain. It was tired. Strained in the way of a person who has been holding something for a very long time, and whose arms have simply given out. He's my father, Julius. This isn't a business decision. I'm not saying it is. I'm saying that what you're proposing has consequences. Financial consequences. Legal consequences. You can't just. I don't care about the consequences. I've made up my mind. Tonight we end this, Julius. I am not doing this anymore. Not to him. Not to myself. A silence. Long enough that the refrigerator's hum downstairs felt conspicuous. Then Julius, quieter now, with an edge underneath the composure that I recognized for the first time as something other than control. You know what happens if you do this. You know what I'll. Don't. Maureen's voice, sharp and sudden. Don't you dare threaten me in my own home. Another silence. I pressed my back against the wall of the landing, and I did something I have not done since Margaret's funeral. I closed my eyes, and I felt the particular vertigo of a world reorganizing itself around you without your permission. Because here is what I had heard. And here is what it was telling me, though the full shape of it was not yet clear. This was not a conversation about getting rid of me. This was a conversation about something between Maureen and Julius. Something that had my name in it. Yes, but not in the way I had first assumed. She had said he's my father, not a business decision. She had said not to him, not to myself. She had said I am not doing this anymore. And Julius had threatened her. Not warned. Threatened. There is a difference. And even through a wall and a partially open door and the muffled acoustics of a suburban house at night, I knew which one I'd heard. My hands, I noticed, had curled into fists at my sides. Not from anger, not yet. From something older and more animal. The instinct of a father. I heard movement in the room. Footsteps, the sound of a drawer, the kind of restless physical displacement of a person too agitated to be still. Then Maureen's voice again, lower now, almost to herself, but clear enough through my hearing aid that I caught every word. I've already talked to the attorney. The accounts are in my name. He doesn't have access to the trust, and he never did. I made sure of that before Daddy moved in. I wasn't going to let him. She stopped. Took a breath. I've been protecting my father this whole time, Julius. The question is whether you're going to let me. The room went quiet again. I was no longer standing at the bottom of my daughter's staircase. I mean that I was physically standing there. Yes, my hand on the banister, my old knees carrying my weight, my heart doing that strange suspended thing it had been doing since the entryway. But the man who had first heard those 4 words, "Tonight we end this," and assumed they meant his exile, his disposal, his quiet removal from the life he'd settled into, that man was gone. In his place was someone else. Someone who was only beginning to understand the full weight of what those words actually meant. Tonight we end this. Not me. Julius. She was ending Julius. Or at least, and this part one was not yet certain of, she was trying to. And Julius, from the sound of that last silence, the kind of silence that is not peaceful but loaded, was not going to make it simple. I moved back from the stairs then. Carefully, quietly, back across the entryway to my room, where I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark without turning on the light, still in my good cardigan, still with my keys in my coat pocket, still with the slight warm residue of Howard's bourbon somewhere in my chest. I sat there and I thought about Maureen, about the girl who called me every day for a year after her mother died, about the woman who had said, in the careful and gentle way she had, "Daddy, this house has 4 bedrooms and 2 of them are just sitting there." About the fact that she had apparently, before I ever moved in, taken steps to protect my financial interests in a household where I now understood there was a reason to need protecting. She had known, long before I did, she had known something about Julius that required her to build a quiet, invisible fence around her father. And she had done it without telling me, without worrying me, without letting me see the strain of it, because she knew, the way daughters who love their fathers know, that I would have carried the weight of it, and it would have broken me. She had been carrying it for me. My eyes, in the dark of that room, burned in the way they hadn't since the gravesite. I pressed the heels of my hands against them and breathed slowly, the way Margaret used to tell me to breathe when things were bad. In for 4, ZAHA. Hold for 4. Out for 4. The world doesn't move faster than your breath. I heard Julius's footsteps cross the ceiling above me. Heavy, deliberate, the footsteps of a man who was angry and trying not to show it even in his walk. I heard a door. Silence. I heard, or imagined I heard, the sound of my daughter, alone in her room, exhaling. And I made a decision. Not tonight. I would not go upstairs tonight. Tonight, I would let Maureen believe the house was empty, that no one had heard, that she had the night to steady herself. Because the most important thing, the thing that had been true since the moment she was born screaming with opinions on a Tuesday in October, was that Maureen was not alone. She just didn't know it yet. I was her father, and I was still here. The truth just turned everything upside down. What do you think Julius has been doing? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I need to know what you're feeling right now. I did not sleep that night. I want to be accurate about that. Not the romanticized sleeplessness of a man dramatically staring at the ceiling in cinematic moonlight, but the grinding, restless, mind-churning wakefulness of a man with too many pieces of information and not yet enough of them to build the full picture. I lay in my bed and I assembled what I knew and arranged it, and rearranged it the way I used to arrange structural calculations when a load distribution wasn't adding up. Looking for the flaw in the design. Looking for the place where the weight was being carried by the wrong beam. What I knew was this. Julius had been doing something. Something that required Maureen to quietly secure financial accounts, to consult an attorney, to protect what belonged to her, and apparently, to protect what belonged to me, without broadcasting any of it. Something that had been building long enough that Maureen had chosen tonight to name it out loud, to draw a line, to use those 4 words, "Tonight we end this." What I did not yet know was the shape of it, the specifics, the how and the how long, and, perhaps most devastatingly, the what has already been lost. These are the things that kept me awake. There is a particular loneliness to being an old man with a secret in the middle of the night. No Margaret to reach for. No one to whisper it to in the dark. To say, "Are you hearing what I'm hearing, Maggie? Is this what I think it is?" Just the house, and the ceiling, and the particular way silence amplifies everything you're afraid of. By 5 in the morning, I'd given up pretending to rest. I got up, dressed quietly in the dark, and went to the kitchen to make coffee. I sat at the kitchen table with my mug and watched the October sunrise begin its slow, indifferent business through the window, painting the hydrangeas in the backyard the color of something Margaret would have had a specific name for. I was on my second cup when I heard footsteps on the stairs. I straightened, prepared my face for whatever was coming, but it was only Maureen. She appeared in the kitchen doorway in her robe, her hair pulled back, and she stopped when she saw me, a fraction of surprise crossing her face. "Daddy, you're up early. Old men don't sleep," I said, the comfortable lie of decades. She crossed to the coffee maker, poured herself a cup, and sat down across from me. And here is the thing. Here is the thing about Maureen that destroyed me quietly in that moment. She looked at me with those eyes, her mother's eyes, and she smiled. A real smile. Warm and deliberate. The smile of a woman who has made a decision and found, on the other side of it, some measure of peace. There was no trace of the voice I'd heard on the landing. No trace of the weight she'd been carrying. She folded her hands around her mug and said, "How was Howard's? How's he doing?" "Good," I said. "He's doing real good." We talked about Howard for a few minutes. We talked about the hydrangeas. We talked about a documentary I'd mentioned wanting to watch. All of it easy, surface warm, the comfortable patter of a father and daughter who know how to simply be in the same room together. And underneath it, on my side, invisible I hoped, a growing, aching awareness that she was protecting me right now in real time. Even this morning, even over coffee, still carrying it so I wouldn't have to. Julius came down at 6:15. He was dressed for the office, pressed shirt, sport coat, the cultivated ease of a man who understands that appearance is its own kind of currency. He poured coffee, kissed the top of Maureen's head, and nodded at me with a brief, composed smile. "Morning, Mr. ZAHA. Morning, Julius." He sat. The three of us were at that table together, and the ordinary domesticity of it, coffee steam, morning light, the sound of the neighborhood starting its day, was so profoundly at odds with what I knew that I had to focus on the middle distance to keep my expression neutral. I watched Julius, the way I hadn't allowed myself to watch him in 3 years of living under his roof, not with the eyes of a grateful guest trying not to cause trouble, but with the eyes of an engineer examining a structure for hidden weakness. And I noticed things, small things that individually meant nothing, but together began to build towards something. The way he watched Maureen when she turned away from him, not with affection, with assessment. The way he asked, casually, as though it were nothing, "Did you call Dr. Peterson back yesterday? About the account paperwork?" And the way Maureen's hand, holding her coffee mug, went very still for just a moment before she said, "I'll call him today." And the way Julius smiled at her answer, a smile that did not change his eyes. After Julius left for the office, the kitchen felt different. Easier. Like a room after a storm door is closed against the wind. Maureen let out a long, quiet breath and got up to rinse her mug, and I made my decision. "Maureen." She turned. "Sit down for a minute." She looked at me. Her expression, I watched it move through a sequence I could read the way I could read bridge stress diagrams. The initial ease of a daughter hearing her father's voice. Then something more careful. Then, at whatever she saw in my face, something closer to alert. She sat. "I came home last night," I said, "and I forgot my hearing aid at Howard's. I went back to get it." The room was very quiet. When I came in the house, I said, measured, careful, watching her face, "I heard you and Julius." Maureen's eyes, her mother's eyes, did not leave mine. She did not look away. She did not flush or deflect. She held very still, the way people who have been braced for a thing hold still when the thing finally arrives. "How much did you hear?" she asked. "Enough," I said. "More than I think you wanted me to hear. Less, probably, than I need to understand the whole of it." A long silence. The refrigerator hummed. A bird made its argument at the window. "Daddy," she started. "I don't want an apology," I said. "I don't want you to tell me you were handling it, or that it's under control, or that I don't need to worry. I'm your father, Maureen. I have been your father for every day of your life, and I need you to talk to me like I am that." Something in her face broke, not collapsed, not crumbled, but broke the way things break when they've been held too tight for too long, and something gentle and warm applies pressure in exactly the right place. Her eyes filled, and she pressed her lips together, and she nodded once. And she told me. She told me all of it. Not in a rush. Maureen was never a person who told things in a rush. She told it the way she'd inherited from her mother, which was carefully, with precision, because she respected language and respected the person she was speaking to enough to give them the truth in its actual shape rather than a simplified version of it. It had begun, she said, about 2 years after I moved in. Julius had approached her about a trust. Margaret's trust, the one Margaret and I had set up years ago, the one that named Maureen as primary beneficiary and had been quietly accumulating. He'd suggested restructuring it. Just for tax purposes, he'd said. My financial advisor says we can reduce the estate exposure if we move some of it into a joint account structure. It had sounded reasonable. Julius was good at making things sound reasonable. She had consulted her own attorney, she said, quietly, without telling Julius she was doing so. And her attorney had told her something that made the coffee in my stomach go cold as she repeated it. The restructuring Julius was proposing would have effectively given him unilateral access to and control over the assets. And there was a clause Julius's language had tried to obscure, that would have classified any financial transfers to me as gifts subject to clawback provisions if the marriage dissolved. He had been building, her attorney said, a financial structure designed to isolate Maureen, and by extension, to leave me without the protections Margaret had spent her life assembling. Maureen had not signed anything. She had quietly, over the subsequent months, shifted what needed shifting, secured what needed securing, and consulted a family law attorney about her options. Last week, that attorney had confirmed that she had everything she needed to proceed. Last night, she had told Julius she was done. By the time she finished telling me, the October morning had come fully through the window, filling the kitchen with the kind of clean, clear light that feels almost offensive in its indifference to human suffering. Maureen sat across from me, her coffee cold, her hands flat on the table between us. She looked exhausted and relieved simultaneously. The exhaustion of someone who has been holding a secret upright in high wind and has finally been allowed to set it down. "I wanted to tell you," she said. "I wanted to so many times, Daddy. But I knew what it would do to you. To know that someone in your own house." "Stop protecting me," I said. My voice came out rougher than I intended. I cleared my throat. "You've been doing that since before I moved in. You've been standing between me and something I didn't even know was coming." I paused. "That's my job, Maureen. That's my job." She looked at me for a long moment, and then she said, very quietly, "You couldn't have done what I did, Daddy. The accounts, the attorney, the paper trail, it required me being inside this marriage to do it. It required me staying long enough to make sure you were protected before I moved." The weight of that landed somewhere in the center of my chest and pressed down hard. My daughter had not simply been protecting herself. She had been protecting me first, staying in something she needed to leave, long enough to make sure I was safe. Every parent's heart just shattered. Mine did, writing this. Tell me in the comments, what kind of daughter does something like this? What are you feeling right now? Julius came home at 6:15 that evening. I was in my chair in the sitting area of my room, door open, and I heard his car in the driveway the way I'd learned to hear it over 3 years, the particular sound of that engine, the specific clunk of that car door. I heard him come through the front door. I heard him greet Maureen, heard the brief murmur of their exchange in the entryway. I heard Maureen say, quietly and clearly, "We need to talk, Julius." In the kitchen, I had spent the day with my daughter. After she told me everything that morning, we had talked for 3 hours, really talked, the kind of talking that peels back years and assumptions and the careful performances people maintain for each other even when they love each other deeply. We talked about Margaret. We talked about loneliness. We talked about how Maureen had noticed, she said, within the first year of my living there, that Julius's relationship with me was not what it appeared to be. That his cordiality was a calculation. That he had, on at least 2 occasions she knew of, spoken to his colleagues about the old man in ways that were dismissive, even contemptuous. A liability, she'd heard him say once through a closed door. A complication. It had broken something in her, she said, quietly, irrevocably. We talked about what happened next, what she needed from me. I told her what I was prepared to do. In the kitchen that evening, I heard their voices rise and fall. I did not stand at the stairs this time. I sat in my chair and let it proceed, because Maureen had asked me to trust her, and I had told her I would. She had a plan. She had, as she'd told me that morning, been building toward this moment with the same methodical precision she'd inherited from an engineer father who once told her that the difference between a bridge that stands and a bridge that falls is not strength, it's preparation. It was 7 o'clock when she knocked on my door. "Daddy, can you come out?" I stood. I straightened my cardigan, the same one I'd worn to Howard's the night before, which now felt like it belonged to a different life, and I walked out into the hallway and through to the kitchen. Julius was standing by the counter. His sport coat was gone, his sleeves rolled to the elbows, and the easy composure I'd watched him maintain over 3 years had developed a visible fracture. His jaw was set. His eyes, when they found mine, did a quick recalculation. He had not expected me to be part of this. Maureen stood at the kitchen table. Between them, laid out neatly, were several documents. I recognized an attorney's letterhead on the top sheet. Beside it, a set of bank statements. Beside that, what appeared to be email printouts. "Sit down, Julius," Maureen said. He did not sit. He crossed his arms and looked from Maureen to me and back again, and in his expression I saw something I had not seen in 3 years of watching this man. I saw him at a loss. The calculation failing. The composed surface showing its actual texture underneath. "Mr. ZAHA," he said, with a tone that was attempting to be conciliatory, "I think this is a conversation between." "This conversation includes my father," Maureen said, flat and calm, "because it is, in part, about my father. So you can speak to both of us, or you can speak to my attorney. Those are your choices." He looked at her. Something moved through his face. Not regret, I thought. Not yet. Something more like a man measuring his options and finding them reduced. "The accounts have been transferred," Maureen continued, looking at him steadily. "Everything that was in my name, and everything that should have been, including the assets from my mother's trust, has been secured. David, her attorney, filed the paperwork this afternoon. I am filing for divorce on Monday morning. I have documentation of the financial restructuring you proposed and the intent behind it. David believes it rises to the level of financial coercion, and I'll let the courts decide whether they agree." Julius unfolded his arms slowly. He placed both hands on the counter behind him, a physical bracing. "Maureen." His voice dropped. Quieter. More careful. "This is not. You're making a mistake. I've made exactly one mistake in the past 3 years, she said, and I've spent those 3 years correcting it." He looked at me then, directly, and I want to be precise about what I saw in that look, because I've thought about it many times since. It was not malice, exactly. It was something more human and therefore more troubling. It was a man confronted with the mirror of what he'd done, and not yet certain whether he was capable of feeling the full weight of it. "Mr. ZAHA," he said, "whatever you've been told." "Julius." My voice surprised me. I hadn't planned to speak, but it came out the way it came out. Not loud, not heated, not the dramatic thunderclap of a righteously angry father. Just level. The voice of a man who has been building things for 40 years and knows what sound a flawed structure makes before it gives. "I'm going to say something to you, and I'm only going to say it once, and I'd like you to actually hear it." He waited. "I don't know the whole story of your life," I said. "I don't know what made you believe that what you were doing in this house was acceptable. I don't know whether it was greed, or fear, or some combination of things that felt justifiable to you in the quiet of your own head. I'm not here to prosecute you." I paused. "But I will tell you this. My wife, Maureen's mother, spent her life building something. Not wealth, exactly, though there was that. She built security. For her daughter. For me. She built it with the understanding that the people who came after her would be people of integrity. She trusted that." Another pause. "I want to know if there's anything in you that understands the gravity of what you almost took from this family." The kitchen was absolutely still. Julius looked at the documents on the table. He looked at his wife, who was watching him with an expression I recognized from her childhood. The expression of a person who has already finished grieving a thing and is simply waiting for the formality of its ending. And then he looked at me, and I saw it. A flicker, brief and unsteady as a candle in a draft, of something that might have been shame. Not manufactured, not strategic, just shame. The kind that a person doesn't necessarily choose to feel, but that arrives anyway when confronted with something true. I didn't, he started. Stopped. The composure reassembled itself reflexively, and then, and this is the moment I keep returning to, it didn't hold. It came apart again. I didn't start out meaning for it to go this way. His voice had lost its professional tone. He sounded, in that moment, unexpectedly human. It was incremental. It became something I couldn't. He stopped again. Julius. Maureen's voice. And there was something different in it now. Not softened, not forgiving of the thing he'd done, but carrying the particular weight of a woman who had once loved a man and was still in some small, private chamber of herself grieving the gap between who she believed him to be and who he was. I know it was incremental. That's the part that's hardest to forgive. Because you had 100 moments where you could have stopped. And you didn't. He sat down then. At the kitchen table. Among the documents. He put his hands flat on the table and he looked at them. And the man I watched in that moment was not the Julius of the pressed shirt and the easy charm and the calculated composure. He was a man who had run out of road. I'll cooperate, he said finally. With the divorce. With whatever David needs. I won't fight the accounts. He looked up at Maureen. I'm not going to fight you. She nodded once. Thank you. I walked to Maureen then. Put my hand on her shoulder. She reached up and covered my hand with hers, and we stood there for a moment, the two of us, her mother's hydrangeas barely visible in the early dark outside the window. I looked at Julius once more. There's a version of this, I said, where what happened here becomes something you learn from. That's the version I'm hoping for. Because Maureen is a gracious woman, and because whatever else is true, you and she have 12 years of life together, and that matters. Even when it ends. Even when it ends like this. I paused. Don't waste what this could teach you. He didn't answer. But he heard me. I believe he heard me. We're at the peak of this story, and I am feeling every word of it. What do you think Julius should do next? Comment below. Your thoughts matter. The weeks that followed were not easy. I want to be honest about that, because stories that pretend the aftermath of upheaval is gentle and graceful are not telling you the truth about how people actually survive hard things. Julius moved out on a Tuesday, 8 days after that kitchen conversation. He'd stayed in the guest room those 8 days, and the house had the peculiar atmosphere of a place in transition. Everything in its usual position, all the furniture and the dishes and the routines, but with a different charge in the air, like the stillness before weather. He and Maureen spoke when necessary. Civilly. With the formal courtesy of two people who have decided to dismantle something carefully rather than break it. The morning he left, he knocked on the door of my room. I opened it, and he stood there in the hallway with his car keys in his hand, and a look I had not seen on him before, stripped of performance, stripped of calculation, just a 44-year-old man who had done a damaging thing and was beginning to understand the full circumference of it. Mr. ZAHA, he said, and then he didn't say anything else for a moment. Julius, I said. I'm sorry, he said. I'm sorry for what I tried to do. To the accounts. To. He stopped, looked at the floor, looked back at me. To what your wife built. I'm sorry for that. I looked at this man for a long moment. Looked at the genuine, unperformed nature of his discomfort. At the particular quality of a person who has come to an apology not because it benefits them, but because they have, somewhere in the difficult interior of recent weeks, been confronted with the truth of what they did and found it ugly. I accept that, I said. And I mean it. I'm not saying it to be gracious. I accept it because I believe you mean it. And because I am 68 years old and I know that the last thing the world needs is more people carrying unforgiven weight. I put out my hand. He shook it. His grip was firm. His eyes were clear. He left. I stood at the window and watched his car back out of the driveway, and I thought about something I had not let myself think yet, about how life prepares you and doesn't prepare you simultaneously for moments like this, about how Margaret had worried, in her last months, about leaving Maureen and me to navigate the world without her. You'll look after each other, she'd said. Promise me. I had promised. I had meant it, but I had imagined the looking after going in one direction. I had imagined myself looking after Maureen, being there for the calls, the graduations, the holidays, the general maintenance of a parent's presence. I had not imagined Maureen looking after me. Not the way she had. Not with the quiet, strategic, fiercely loving vigilance of a daughter who had seen something coming for her father and had placed herself between them without making a sound. Margaret would not have been surprised. She'd always said Maureen was the best thing we ever did. She was right. The divorce proceedings took 6 months. Maureen's attorney, David, was excellent, thorough, patient, and as Maureen had told me, already prepared with documentation that made Julius's cooperation the path of least resistance. Julius did cooperate, as he'd said he would. The financial structure he'd attempted to build was unwound with relative efficiency. Margaret's trust remained intact. The accounts that Maureen had quietly secured during those careful, vigilant months remained hers. During those 6 months, the house on Whitmore Lane reconfigured itself. It was quieter, yes. Some evenings had a weight to them that I would not pretend wasn't there. The particular weight of a home that has lost a member, however complicated that member's departure was. Maureen had 12 years of her life woven into her marriage to Julius, and the grieving of that does not simply wait politely for a convenient time. It arrived in small, unpredictable moments, a dish she'd always made for him, a television program they'd watched together, the reflexive reach for a phone to share something with a person who was no longer in that position in her life. I watched her grieve it with the same precision and steadiness she applied to everything. And I was there. I made coffee in the mornings. I kept my door open in the evenings. I didn't push, and I didn't hover, and I tried to calibrate myself, the way I always had with Maureen, to what she actually needed rather than what I assumed she needed. On a Friday evening in March, 5 months after Julius moved out, Maureen knocked on my sitting room door and stood in the doorway with 2 mugs of tea, the way Margaret used to stand in doorways. She handed me one and sat in the armchair across from me, and we watched the evening settle through the window for a while, without saying much. "Daddy," she said eventually. Are you happy here? Still? After everything?" I turned to look at her. She was watching me with her mother's eyes, with the genuine, searching quality of someone who needed a real answer, not a comfortable one. "Maureen," I said, "I am in a house with good coffee and hydrangeas and the best company I know. Yes, I'm happy." She smiled. Not the careful, managed smile of the woman keeping a secret for her father. The real one. The one I recognized from when she was 7 years old and had done something she was proud of. "I've been thinking," she said, "about getting the garden professionally redone in the spring. Mom's hydrangeas need help, and I thought," she paused, "I thought maybe we could add some of the roses she liked. The climbing kind she always said she wanted on the back fence." Something warm moved through my chest. "I think she'd have liked that very much," I said. "I think so too." We sat there, the two of us, with our tea, while the dark came fully over the backyard, and I thought about what Howard had said to me a few weeks prior when I'd told him the whole story over coffee at his kitchen table. Howard had sat with it for a long time, in the way Howard sat with things, thoroughly, without rushing to conclusions. Then he'd said, "ZAHA, you know what that story is? That's a love story, between a father and a daughter, just dressed up as a crisis." I'd thought about that a lot in the weeks since, about whether he was right, and the more I thought about it, the more I believed he was. Because what had actually happened, beneath the documents and the attorneys and the financial betrayal and the confrontation in the kitchen, was this. A daughter had loved her father with such completeness that she had quietly reorganized her life to protect him. She had absorbed the weight of a complicated marriage partly, significantly, because she needed time to make sure her father was safe before she could leave it. She had stood in the gap between me and something I didn't even know was coming, the way parents stand in gaps for children, and she had never asked for my gratitude or my awareness. She'd just done it, and I had, in a moment of ordinary forgetfulness, a forgotten hearing aid, a turned-around car, a late evening in October, stumbled into the truth of it. Some gifts arrive in ordinary packaging. There is an evening in late April that I want to describe to you, because it is the image I return to most when I think about this chapter of my life. It was warm enough to have the back door open, the early spring pushing through the screen with the smell of fresh dirt and the hydrangeas coming back after the winter. Maureen's hands had been in that garden every weekend for a month, and it showed. The climbing roses she'd ordered had arrived, and were beginning to find the back fence, small and determined, the way things that are well-planted begin. I was in my chair with my newspaper. Maureen was on the back porch with her book. We weren't talking. We were just there, in the same space, in the easy, unhurried way of two people who have been through something true together and have come out on the other side of it with each other still intact. I thought about Margaret. I thought about the promise I'd made. You'll look after each other. I thought about a small, flesh-colored hearing aid sitting in a ceramic dish on Howard's bathroom counter. About a car turning around on a dark road in October. About 4 words heard through a partially open door. Tonight we end this. Not me. Not us. Just the thing that needed ending. My daughter turned a page of her book in the evening light, and the climbing roses moved in a small wind against the fence, and somewhere in the neighborhood a child was calling to another child, the sound of it bright and free and full of spring, and I sat in my chair and I breathed. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, and I was grateful. Grateful for the forgotten thing. Grateful for the turned-around drive. Grateful for the small, efficient device that translated the world back to me at the moment it most needed translating. Grateful for my daughter, who had been, all along, the bridge that held. I am Mr. ZAHA. I am 68 years old. And I am, against everything the night I forgot my hearing aid seemed to promise, the luckiest man I know. Margaret would have said, some stories don't end. They just arrive at their truest beginning. She wasn't wrong. She was never wrong. Please leave a comment below. Tell me which moment got you. Tell me which character you saw yourself in. Tell me what it made you think about your own family. Your comments keep these stories alive, and they mean everything. Thank you so much for watching my story all the way to the end. Your support means everything. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts.